So there is nothing, there's nothing there except ourselves, unfortunately.
Quote at the very end, I believe it might be even your last line, is so you finally understand me. And that is in many ways what kind of stuck with me once the credits began to roll. And I sat back and first off, I hadn't read the short story and I'm like, wow, what a cool take on the tale. What a great idea. What a twist. What's your interpretation of that line and of that ending?
Well, I think that look, I'm to draw from another, there's a great uh bit of dialogue that Brando as Walter Kurtz in Apocalypse Now, and he imparts to Willard, and he says, horror has a face, and you must make a friend of horror. Horror and moral terror are your friends. If they are not, they are enemies. They are enemies truly to be feared. And
Hmm.
I felt like that is the subtext of what he's saying is uh it's kind of the Boy Scout motto, right? Always be prepared. But it's sort of he's not been able to impart. He doesn't give a lot of it's the kind of basics, but I think it's his way of closing with his kid. Now you get who I am, and you become what I have beheld, and I am content that I have done right. And that's what I find that is it's kind of poignant. I mean, it's poignant and malevolent, and in an odd way loving and vulnerable. There's a you know there's a myriad of stuff that comes through in that line. Well, I mean, at the line itself, whether or
Yeah.
not I said it properly and projected that is an entirely different story. But no, I think that line is a powerful line.
What are some of the things from the original story that you knew were essential to keep in the film?
Yeah. Well, I loved to me how clear and simple the short story was. It was a story about a father and a son, and he chose this kind of genius move to place it in this mythology that we're all familiar with. So for me, it was really about being honest to that dynamic, the character dynamic, and not get too washed up in the Dracula-ness of it.
Right.
Um, and, I also, as a huge fan of the original source material of Bram Stoker's novel, I wanted to make sure that even though we are looking at these characters through a new lens, that it does not change anything from the original material. So, part of my process was going back in and rereading and specifically looking at all of the scenes with Abraham, with Van Helsing, and reading it with Joe's story in mind. And it felt so organic to me. And I think, I couldn't help but think in the back of my head, like, well, was Bram Stoker, was this intentional? Like, is that actually placed this way? Because you have this guy who comes in, um, as this figure of total authority, right? Like he comes in, he already has the answers, he already has his cure, and we have
Hmm.
no idea where he got it from. We have no idea, where is this guy coming from? And when you read it through this idea of Abraham as a cult leader, as this man who's coming in with this air of authority that these confused, scared kids just line right up behind him. This story starts to get very interesting very quickly. So for me, I really wanted to stay loyal not just to Joe's intention, but to the original
Mm.
characters.
There's a read on the film, and this can dive into spoilers completely, where I feel like by the end, Abraham is the monster, and the credits roll, and I'm like, so were there even any vampires in this world? Like, was it all just almost like a fantasy? Like, am I alone in that, or is that an element that I think you
That
hope
that is
audiences
my
will think?
read.
Okay,
That was our intention. Yes. So I think Joe's short story. This is totally spoilers, but to me,
it's
Joe's
great.
short story is very clear that vampires there is evil in the world, but it is a real evil. And Abraham's fear, whatever it is that's eating this man up inside, has manifested into this mythology, right? That of course places him, Abraham, at the center as the hero. Um, but the reality is he's something closer to like a Jack the Ripper, right? Like he's a little bit closer to like a serial killer or something like that. And to me, that's such a fascinating read on the monster movie. Um,
Totally.
and in our film, every time you see the monster, every time you see the vampire, it is always through the lens of a character. So there is nothing there's nothing there except ourselves, unfortunately.
Your character has what I would call an anticlimactic death. Like going into the movie, I'm like, oh man, like here we go. Like what? There's a very climactic death later in the film, but yours isn't really. So I guess kind of my question is like, what was your interpretation of her death and the impact it's supposed to have on the audience?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because Mina in Joe's story has already passed. Natasha is taking this character and giving her some time, like we're seeing her last act with the boys. And I think that her purpose in this is to start warning the boys. She's had this cognitive dissonance this whole time because she has been attacked by Dracula, and it's easier for her to believe Abraham's explanations than it is for her to deal with this trauma. But I think as she's getting closer and closer to death, she's having some clarity of mind and realizing, are vampires real? Is Abraham's explanations real? And I think her purpose is to reach out and to start warning Max about the dangers of their own father. So, yeah, I mean, she's also like a classic. This is like a classic character in the Dracula and vampire world, where someone who can see and has this telepathic connection to Dracula. I think she's also a conduit for our. We don't know if it's real or not, but we know that she thinks it's real. So I mean, she has like a function in the movie to kind of bring up these doubts for the boys, and then also doubt herself. So yeah, she's kind of a liminal character. Yeah, she's a tragic, haunted character.
This is a bit of a spoiler question for you, Brady, but what do you think happens the next day? You lop off your dad's head, things move on. Like what do you think happens to these characters? Like the next day, the next week, what happens next?
Well, I think the first step is self-reflection. Max is on a horse with his brother. I think he's looking back on everything because this is the very next day, not even 12 hours, because I mean this was a night scene. So I think he's looking back on everything. Was it the right decision? Because no one told him to go do it. Was this the right decision, or was he wrong? Is he now becoming the exact thing that he wanted to stop, which is his father? So I think that there's this big internal conflict thing with Max. But in terms of where they go, I couldn't say that I know. I know Natasha has teased that around this time when they leave, World War I is setting up. So are they going to go enlist and fight in the war? There's just been all these little things that we've messed with. But I really am looking forward to see what the audience says, what kind of theories that everyone comes up with, because you have two very young boys who are now without any parents, really don't have any possessions, and they're riding off. So I am excited to see what kind of conversation sparks.